On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop, fast-forwarded to where Santa would show up, and then pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen, frantically waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy they were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped the gifts. I spotted a box that I had not seen the night before. It was small and wrapped in blue foil paper. My name was on it, but my wife seemed just as surprised to see it. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, it's gotta be from Mr. Elf," she said, her voice cheerful and bright. I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird thing kids say. But my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "Honey, what elf?" she asked. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended, and all that was left on screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me like a bird in a jet propeller. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back, until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off. He stood there, watching me prattling around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man in the elf costume stood perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head off of a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth marks on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I still thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow, steady breathing. He reached toward the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box he left behind, ripped the bow off of it, and tossed the string away. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, in a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I had put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened up the back. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught, or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. I had never seen my father wield a weapon before. On that cold Christmas Eve of 1988, he opened one of the cabinets in the living room and pulled out his shotgun. He gave me a long, hard look. "I'm sorry, Amy," and then stepped into the backyard to put Snuffles down.
There's always a reason to be afraid.
Don't come to any conclusions just yet. Let's start from the very beginning. My parents always had trouble bearing children. They had tried every method out there, but always seemed to fail. I was a 1 in a million chance, and yet, 9 months later, I was delivered into my mother's arms, Amy Melinda Ramsey. My parents took so many pictures of me, and most of them they looked as if they were about to burst with joy, thrilled to have a healthy baby girl. I think it was as soon as I began to speak that I questioned the singularity of my existence. "Can I have a little brother?" I would pester my mom as I played on the hardwood floor. We'll see," she would always say. I never addressed any questions to my father. To my younger self, He was always a daunting and intimidating figure in our house. He was one of those quiet working guys, the blue-collar type, always on time for his employer. It was a Monday if I recall correctly. The kid next door brought over a puppy for our play date. It took me about 2 seconds before I instantly fell in love with its bulging brown eyes, cartoonish smile, and adorable face. I wanted him to stay forever, but he eventually had to leave. It's funny how a child's mind sometimes works. At that point, I had completely forgotten about my longing for a brother or sister. Such thoughts had been replaced by an army of tiny puppy dogs. A few days before Christmas, we sat at the dinner table. My mom took a sip of her soup and smiled at me. "Have you wrote your letter to Santa yet?" No, not yet." "Well, how do you expect him to know what you want then?" "I want a puppy dog, a pug, and I already have a name picked out for him. Snuffles." "Well, if that's the case, write it down on a piece of paper and hang it on our tree." My father nodded a few times here and there, but didn't utter a single word. I would later find out that he had been laid off that day. I guess they were trying to protect me from such things. I diligently followed my mother's orders. This was my best chance of getting a puppy, and I wasn't about to waste it. I sat down on a small toy table in my room and wrote a letter with the best handwriting a 6-year-old could manage. I remember that my letter, although crude and concise, was flooded with crayon drawings of me and Snuffles. My mom helped me hang it on one of the highest branches of our Christmas tree. I stood there for a while, admiring my handiwork, filling my mind with all the adventures that Snuffles and I would have. As a result of my father losing his job, we struggled to make ends meet. I could see it in their faces, in the corners of their mouths and eyes. There was something going on, but they would just cloak it up with a half-assed grin. My parents concluded that a pug puppy was simply out of the question right now, and bought me a toy pug instead. They had hoped that this would keep me happy until they could eventually save up some money for a real one. I bet they were quite surprised when they saw a strange box under the Christmas tree that neither of them recognized on December 25th, 1988. It vibrated around violently, and there was definitely something whimpering inside. "Snuffles!" I cried. My parents stood back in the corner of the living room as I rushed to grab the moving box. It was beautifully wrapped with a deep violet paper and intricate black jewels. An elegant golden bow crowned the gift, resting ominously on top of it. A letter was attached to one of the sides of the box. The handwriting was cursive, and as a child, I was unable to read it. I gave the letter to my mom, eager to know what Santa had written for me. She read the letter in silence, and after glancing back to my father, and what I can only describe as sheer shock, she handed him the card. My father scanned it briefly before rushing out of the house. He circled the property for about 10 minutes before coming back inside, pale as the snow sticking to his boots. "What does it say?" I asked. They kept talking to each other, completely disregarding my inquiry. I don't recall their exact words, but it was something along the lines of psycho, sick joke, or something like that. I started to get scared, but I couldn't understand why, since I assumed that it was my pug puppy dog, Snuffles, inside that box, which was exactly what I asked for. "Hey!" I yelped as my dad snatched the box away from me. "Let me take a look, sweetie. The letter says he might be sick." My dad took the box and locked himself in his study. After a couple of minutes, he called for my mother, and they both disappeared behind the study's oak door. When they finally came back, they both had a heavy look in their eyes. It was that painful gaze I had come to recognize. It wasn't until 10 years later, after I had almost forgotten all about the incident, that I stumbled upon that letter again. My father had gotten out of his rut and scored a high-paying job in Dallas. I was helping him pack the things in his study when the letter, as if guided by some invisible force, landed on the floor when I picked up a stack of papers in one of the desk drawers. "Hey, was this the letter that Snuffles came with? Well, where did you find that? It was in your drawer." My father sighed. It was just some sick joke from a prankster. So, Snuffles, listen, Amy, I don't know what was inside that box, but I can assure you, it was not a dog. After he left the room, I read the letter. "Dear Amy, thanks for reaching out. I think you meant to spell Santa, but don't worry, my child. I'll show you that I am way better than that fat, self-righteous, cookie-gobbling old man. As proof, I brought you a special gift. I hope you like it. It's not exactly what you would expect, but I hope you understand that I have limited resources to work with down here. Anyway, enjoy your gift, and have a Merry Christmas. Yours truly, Lucifer." Last year on Boxing Day, I found this really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective during the holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I forgot all about it until my wife and I, along with our 2 daughters, were decorating the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and that we would secretly catch Santa in the act. I had this old costume in the attic and intended to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on Christmas Eve. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea that I repositioned it later, so it could actually catch the living room at a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on, just to make sure it was working properly. In the morning I previewed the footage, just long enough to confirm the thing was working. Satisfied, I inserted the micro SD card in the back and slipped in a new battery in anticipation for the big night. I didn't want to disappoint my girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room for in our stomachs, like we do every year. We allowed our daughters to open one gift from Mommy and Daddy before going to bed. The girls still riding their sugar high. We could hear them giggling in their bedrooms from all the way upstairs. From time to time, my wife and I could hear them shush each other, claiming that they heard hooves on the roof. Eventually the kiddos dozed off. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed for bed, while I turned off all the lights. I retrieved the costume and tiptoed into the living room, getting ready for my big feature film debut. I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies, drank the milk, and patted my large stomach. I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in full view of the camera. Pretty good acting job, if I do say so myself. My hands are trembling as I write this. I'm on my laptop, hiding in my closet. I've called the cops, but I don't think they'll be here in time. I mean, who takes calls on Christmas Eve seriously? They probably think I'm some teenager prank calling them because I have nothing better to do. Who would believe what I'm about to say anyway? Let me back things up and set the scene for you. I live alone, 2 states away from my family. I felt terrible for not being able to visit them this year. I've been having some financial struggles as of recent. Paying off student loans is no joke. This is the first time I've been able to live on my own. I'm renting a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. All that's around is a convenience store and a bar. The place is nice, and the rent is cheap, so who am I to complain? One bed, one bath, and a cramped kitchen that's right behind the living room. The living room has a nice fireplace too, and it seems to keep the house warm at night. So now that you've got the picture, I have to get into what happened, no matter how few people will actually believe it. I didn't have any big plans for the holidays. Stay at home, watch some TV, eat a frozen pizza if I was lucky. No big, fancy dinner, no visitors, just an average night. I was kicked back on my couch, with a pizza slice in my hand, watching Christmas movies until my eyes grew heavy. I was awakened by a knock at my door. It was around 11:45, dark and snowy out, usual for this time of year. I don't get visitors, nor did I see who it was, so I looked out of the small window in the living room. The glass was cloaked by frost, making it quite a challenge to see what was waiting for me on the other side. I could make out a human-like figure. My gut was telling me to stay the hell away from what was at my door. The snow was falling so heavily that it was hard to see anything beyond 6 feet from my house. I trusted my gut though, and moved to my room. I began to think I was a bad person for leaving whoever was out there in that icy mess. Just as that thought entered my mind, there came another knock, louder this time. I covered my ears in response to the noise beyond my door. I faced away, and it only got worse. I was right to trust my instincts. I shouldn't open the door. I can't let this go on. I exhaled deeply and reluctantly shuffled over to my door. I twisted the knob and peeked outside, the cold weather nipping my face. Hello? I peered through the crack. Hi. I began to make out facial characteristics and realized it was a young woman. My car broke down, and this seemed like the only place to seek shelter. That was a red flag. There's a convenience store and a bar less than a mile away from here. Why does this random person have to show up for help now? I consider myself a nice guy, but the holidays don't bring out the best in me. I also don't like my sleep being interrupted either. I wasn't sure how to respond. Her behavior was off, to say the least. She was glancing over her shoulder, as if she could see anything through the darkness and snow. I can give you a number for the towing company. There should be an inn less than a few miles away from here. The tow truck driver will take you there. She didn't seem satisfied. Are you sure? It's awfully cold out here, and I don't know how long it will take them to get here. She began to look more paranoid. Her eyes darted from side to side, up and down. It was really freaking me out. Listen, my house is a wreck and it's the middle of the night. I'm sorry. I know it's the holidays, but I have a thing about letting strangers into my home. I immediately regretted saying those words. Her fear turned to anger. At this point, she became hysterical. She began to kick, punch, and beat my door, trying to force her way inside. Her polite words were now screams. Let me alone! The insane woman at my door pounded harder and harder. It seemed like the wood was about to break. What the hell was I supposed to do in this situation? So in the spur of the moment, I just locked my door. The knob then rattled violently. I picked up my phone and alerted the authorities that there was a lunatic woman outside of my house. At this point, I figured that she had given up and left. I sat back down in front of the TV. I pondered why she was so upset. No family, trauma. None of my theories seemed to add up. Just as I was beginning to relax, I heard a faint sound. It was so subtle that it seemed loud. It was a shuffling of snow outside of my window. I pulled back my blinds and peered outside. The dim light from the street lamps shined onto my snow-covered lawn. I squinted. The woman was making a circle in the snow. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness outside. It was now 1 a.m. There were symbols I couldn't quite make out. There was also a large pentagram in the center. When she finished her artwork, she jerked her head and looked right at me. It was like she was staring into my soul. Her gaze sent chills down my spinal cord. Her mouth then opened, much too wide to be human. Then she let out a horrific scream. I fell back into my couch. What the hell was I going to do now? I called the cops for a second time. Here's how that phone call went. I started by giving them my address. I need police now. Please come quick. Sir, we already have a sheriff and backup on the way there. They should be there within the hour. Lock your doors. I then heard a click on the other end. Hello? Is anyone there? Hello? Unbelievable. My tax dollars for this shit. In that moment, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was alone in this house, and there's some satanic worshipping psycho lady standing in my yard in the dead of night. To top it all off, the cops that should be arresting this woman are probably out for drinks somewhere. I let out an audible sigh and sat on the floor with my back to the couch. This is not what I thought of as an ideal Christmas. After a brief period of inactivity, I suddenly had a sliver of hope. Maybe she was gone. I picked myself up off the floor and made my way to the bathroom. I didn't want to risk her seeing me if she was still outside, so I didn't turn on any lights. I just used the dim light on my phone. I brushed my teeth and rinsed my face. Once I finished up in the bathroom, I heard a knock at the door, followed by a scream. It was deep, unlike the one I heard before. Something in me clicked, and I mustered the strength to look outside again. I saw blue and red flashes. Finally, the police had arrived. But something was wrong. The lights from the cruisers further illuminated my lawn. There were two mangled bodies on top of what I can only describe as an altar. Their shredded black uniforms informed me that these were the two officers that were dispatched. Another guttural howl was heard, this time only a few feet away from my window. The only thing I could think to do was to hide, which brings me to where I am right now, inside my closet. There are two dead bodies in the snow, and something is outside of my house. Something not human. I don't know when she, or it, whatever the hell you want to call it, will get inside, but my gut is telling me that she will eventually find a way. I couldn't have picked a worse spot to hide either. I feel like the idiot friend in a horror film that gets plucked off first. If you're listening to this, protect yourself this holiday season. If it knocks at your door, do not let it know you're there. Don't be like me. Save yourself and your family.
During the late hours of the night, my mind traveled to some faraway place beyond the constraints of known reality. I found myself walking through a void of darkness, my involuntary stride upon the unseen ground guiding me through the endless realm. I eventually entered a domain tinted by twilight. A dark monolith stood at the center of the bleak illumination. I approached the standing apparatus with a mixture of dreadful caution and morbid fascination. Though its design was rudimentary, its placement within the gloom held some unknown significance. A violent shine appeared upon the construct's surface, disrupting the gray and black patterns surrounding me. The light contorted until it shaped into a horrid face that donned a metallic respirator connected to a series of tubes that disappeared into its torso. Its soulless, black eyes glared at me with the malice of an evil reflection, causing me to take frantic steps back. The configuration approached the transparent threshold and hovered into the pervading twilight. Looking upon the complexity of the creature's design was like watching someone burn to death. Terrifying, yet intriguing. It wore a cyclopean armor embedded with rusted gears that rotated as it moved. Its arms were an amalgamation of tubing networked across exposed muscle. A cylindrical headgear surmounted the figure, making it resemble a great pharaoh. The gravity of my lack of understanding summoned a gripping fear that caused me to fall backward. It gazed upon the elevated conundrum as it moved toward me with unnatural grace. Its shadow towered over me, and a violet hue flickered from inside its dark eyes as a distorted voice resounded from its respirator.
Do not be frightened. I am the emissary. Your presence here indicates that your potential will be fulfilled, if that is what you desire. However, you must first shed your mortal perception.
The mysterious being in the realm of twilight faded into the familiar textures of my bedroom ceiling. I lay there, listening to the soft rattle of the table fan that rested on the nightstand next to my bed, while I examined the nonsensical patterns above me. One could argue that I left one nightmare and woke into another. I came to my silent conclusions about the thing that called itself the emissary. The rusted cogs, the network of tubes, the towering headgear that resembled a massive piston. I'd seen all of those details before at some point in my meaningless life. Dreams will construct things from random information stored inside the brain. Although the results can be interesting, they were essentially meaningless. The mystery of the emissary had been solved by a man still in his underwear, staring up at his squiggly ceiling. My eyes averted to the window that sat adjacent to my bed, and I watched the faint light of the dawn bloom into a bright sunrise. A cloud of smoke expelled from my lungs as I sat on my front porch, thinking about the ruins of my life. My thumb moved across a plastic screen as digital images of happier times scrolled past. I could not look at them without my soul being overwhelmed by anger and regret. The inner turmoil would soon have me pondering questions of a philosophical nature, bordering on self-pity. If two people love each other, why can't they just be together? Why isn't that enough? Why wasn't I enough? No matter how many hours I spent on the internet, combing through online forums or watching videos that told me my anger was justified, it did little to lift my spirit. Society can change, but human nature will always remain the same. This world has little sympathy for a broken man, and the depths of my damage were invisible to those around me. My thoughts were interrupted as I observed with disdain a maroon Dodge Dynasty pulling into my driveway. Die nasty. I knew who it was, and I'd absolutely no intention of standing up and walking out to greet them with disingenuous pleasantries. The girl I once knew exited the passenger side door of the vehicle. Her jeans did very little to hide the loveliness of her figure as she made her way to the front porch. A once familiar voice spoke.
Hello, Charles.
I set down my cigarette on the ashtray next to me and watched the smoke rise from the burning ember, then begrudgingly offered the coldest of responses. Hello, Julia. I looked into her green eyes and thought about how we used to make love on top of the washing machine in my garage. The memory of her soft moans reminiscent of a unity I thought would last forever. However, fate hardly ever caters to such expectations.
How are you doing?
Peachy, I responded. My eyes averted to the Dynasty still sitting in the driveway with its engine running. A man sat in its driver's seat and stared back at me with intense apprehension. I decided to ask the obvious. Why is David here? The look in Julia's eyes suggested that she predicted this line of questioning, but it held out hope that she wouldn't have to explain to me why her upgrade had accompanied her.
Please, Charles, I don't want to fight. I'm just here to get the rest of my things.
Oh, well, you're going to love what I have to say. I picked my cigarettes back up and took another drag before enlightening my former lover. Then you should get back in your car and have Mr. Perfect drive you down to the local dump, because I threw the rest of your shit out.
You did what?
That's right. I put all your stuff into boxes, drove it down to the dumpsters, and tossed them.
Even the necklace my grandmother gave me?
I couldn't help but crack an amused smile. Whatever I had with Julia was dead and buried. What did I have to lose by being honest for once? Yes, I even threw out that hideous thing.
You son of a bitch!
Julia wailed, tears welling up in her eyes. The commotion caused the driver's side door of the Dynasty to open, and Mr. Perfect emerged from the vehicle.
Hey, Julia. Is everything alright?
She turns to him with dripping eyes and unintelligible sobs. It was a truly pathetic display of anguish, but one that I understood all too well. A broken heart can bring out the worst in people, and for me, sorrow eventually turns to cruelty. Everything is fine, David. I was just telling Julia here that her belongings no longer reside at this residence. My words carried a thick, sarcastic undertone to them. My eyes were met with the cold stare of a man who spent at least 3 hours a day lifting weights. He did not seem to appreciate my sense of humor. Mr. Perfect made his way over to Julia and wrapped his veiny arms around her. After whispering something into her ear, Julia collected herself and nodded her head. They began walking back to the Dynasty, still embracing each other. So fucking dramatic. Mr. Perfect opened the passenger side door, and before Julia took a seat, she gave me some parting words.
I'll be filing a police report, Charles. You had no right to throw away my stuff, and I will be pressing charges.
I smirked. This is about as close as I would get to settling the score. I'm sorry, Charles. You're just not good enough anymore. I'm going to be with David now, because that's what makes me happy, and you don't get a say-so in the matter. You just have to respect my decision. I don't have to respect a damn thing, Julia. Personally, I think a few discarded items is a small price to pay for playing games with my fucking life. Well, you tell him where to find me, and have a wonderful day, I said as I placed the cigarette between my lips. I was met with another hateful scowl as Mr. Perfect backed out of the driveway. I methodically raised my right hand, ensuring he saw the extended middle digit. A loud rumble bellowed from the Dynasty's engine as it accelerated down the street. Maybe we can be friends after she's done siphoning you too, I hopelessly thought to myself as I watched the taillights disappear. The sun sank into the horizon and gave way to the night sky. Julia's visit had left a bad taste in my mouth throughout the day. I hated myself for becoming this vulnerable. My dedication and passion towards her were pure. I wanted to do the right thing in a world dominated by self-serving ambition, yet this sentiment was not reciprocated. My story was another chapter in the tome of human misery. Despite all of this, something inside me, buried beneath an ocean of pain, still yearned for her. I resigned to my resting place and closed my eyes as my memories brought me back to the day of my mother's funeral. The loss of my beloved mother to an unexpected accident had devastated me. The only person who'd ever truly loved me unconditionally. All composure was lost as I squeezed Julia's hand and stared down at my mother's coffin with overflowing eyes. Tragedy forces us to reflect on our own mortality, but the truth is, we don't want to die alone. The loss left a deep crater inside of me, one that would never truly be healed. I might have come to terms with my mother's death had her life ended on a more peaceful note.
As I walk through the valley in the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for the Spirit of Almighty God is with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
The priest's words offered no solace. I then imagined my mother's horrified face, illuminated by the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck before it utterly obliterated her.
Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord
forever.
As the memory faded back into the recesses of my mind, somnolence overcame me.
Merry Christmas.
The world of shadow welcomed me once again as I traveled through its sightless continuum. A dreadful dissonance echoed in the surrounding darkness like the melody of feasting gluttons. Like before, I was led to a sanctuary of twilight where a dark construct stood. Its appearance instantly reminded me of the mechanical stranger who spoke to me during my last visit. The thing that called itself the emissary. As soon as the recognition crossed my subconscious, a prodigious beam of blinding light descended from the unseen heavens and illuminated the dark form before me. The light revealed an ominous metal chamber equipped with various straps and chains. Its appearance was accompanied by an unearthly reverberation. The sound became a deafening crescendo as a black, twisted mass ascended from the depths of the gloom. I gazed upon the erecting mound of screaming faces and writhing limbs with a terror unmatched by any previous experience. The shapeless form engulfed the chamber, sending arches from beneath its thick surface towards its pinnacle. A repulsive, belching noise resounded from within the mass as fluids were projected from the faces near its summit. The vile apparition began to recede back into the gloom, and the screams of despair faded. The chamber became visible again. A blindfolded man now occupied its restraints.
What the fuck is going on here? Where am I? Please, someone. Anyone. Help!
The man cried. I tried calling out to him, but words would not come forth. The grinding of unseen mechanics preceded the appearance of two shiny cylinders on either side of the chamber.
What the fuck is that? Someone get me the hell out of here!
The blindfolded man shouted as several clawed tendrils emerged from the cylinders and surrounded him. The claws shaped themselves into blades and descended upon the suspended subject. The man shrieked in pain as his flesh was penetrated. I felt bile rising, and I covered my mouth with my hands. As cynical as I am, I did not wish to see this man be mutilated beyond recognition. But I was unable to close my eyes. The man's moribund wails were cut short by a final impalement to the jugular. Fresh blood fell from his open mouth and mingled with the rest of his bleeding wounds. The blades retracted from the anatomy as an enlarged tendril appeared behind the chamber and attached itself to the man's bare cranium. The restraints that held the lacerated body evaporated as it was lifted into the illumination above the structure, where it was surrounded by additional machinery, and a series of needles skewered the blindfold, penetrating the eyes beneath. As rivers of red flowed down the man's face, I felt the limits of my endurance slipping away as the visage of horrific mechanization drifted into the ether, and the familiar textures returned. I probably should have been paying attention to what the uniformed man standing at the bottom of the steps was telling me. Instead, I sat on my front porch, examining the glowing ember making its way down the cigarette I held, and reflected on the decision I made years ago to ignore the health risks of my daily habit. I found it ironic that I could not self-terminate, but I also didn't see the value of preserving my life. I suppose slowly killing myself with tobacco sticks was a compromise. If I exited this world laying on a hospital bed with tubes up my nose, who would honestly give a shit? We're all headed to some kind of afterlife, right? Maybe it'll be a paradise where things like cancer, betrayal, and vanity don't exist, and we all coincide as a collective in blissful peace and harmony. Or maybe everything just stops forever. Whatever the case, until the corrosion of time liberated me, the world of consequence would be my domain. The officer standing outside my front porch examined his notepad as he went through the passionless notions.
Julia said you two recently went through a difficult separation, and she came here yesterday to get the rest of her belongings. She also mentioned something about a necklace. She says that you told her you threw everything out. Is that true?
While still watching the cancerous vapors evaporate into the world, I responded to the man with the badge. No, it wasn't a separation. It was a severance. The officer only offered a puzzled look as he stood there with his open notepad. I continued. The word separation implies that two people came to a mutual agreement. There was nothing mutual about the situation whatsoever. I felt the officer's judgmental eyes sizing me up as I put out the cigarette in the ashtray next to me. Oh, I knew that look. Another person off-put by thorough observation and understanding. The man with the badge can think what he likes. His satisfaction and suspicions were not important to me. It all comes down to what he can prove, a concept that was not lost on me when I discarded Julia's things, along with that ugly-ass necklace. I watched the last bit of smoke disappear from the pile of ash before I offered the man with the badge self-serving falsehoods. To answer your question, officer, I didn't throw anything out, and I don't know where her necklace is. As far as I'm aware, she took all of her things with her when she moved out 3 weeks ago.
She told us a very different story, and she has a witness that corroborated everything.
Oh, you mean the stud that she left me for? That guy is taking her side. Shocker. My sarcasm wasn't usually this obvious, but I felt it was warranted. Look, officer, she's either mistaken or she's wasting your time. We were together for 3 years, and I can speak from experience when I say Julia can put on a good sob story. She came here yesterday with her witness and expected me to just allow them to poke around inside my house. I looked the uniformed man in the eyes with a smirk. Well, there's only so much a guy can take, am I right? There existed a conniving man inside Charles Sebastian Crawford, and he was well-versed in the art of deception. The man with the badge was bound by the esoteric law, although mighty, under the right circumstances, it could be manipulated. The officer nodded. I could tell that he recognized I wasn't going to make this easy for Julia. Having no avenue to refute my version of events, his next words carried a hint of relief.
So it's your word against hers.
Translation. This is now a matter of civil litigation, and it's no longer my problem. I offered a genuine smile. "Looks that way, officer." The man jotted something down in his notepad before snapping it shut. He did not offer a bid farewell as he began to walk back towards his patrol car, which sat where the Dynasty had the day before. I predicted that he would simply board his cruiser and drive off. Perhaps he'd call Julia at some point and give her the bad news. Much to my surprise, he instead stopped mid-stride and said something in a noticeably monotone voice.
There is darkness within you, friend.
The remark from the police officer, who had previously seemed slightly annoyed and severely disinterested in the situation, had actually struck a chord with me, forcing me to leave my own mind and be one with reality. I stood up from my chair. "What did you just say?" The man with the badge looked over his shoulder, revealing the left side of his face. His one visible eye glowed in contrast to his dark complexion. I thought I had him figured out the moment he exited his car. He was just a mundane enforcer of the law. However, his glowing eyes suggested something of an enigmatic nature. The monotone voice came again, carrying methodically vague undertones.
You are beyond my reach. I can only hope that your better nature prevails.
The voice belongs to someone who might have had the answers to the many questions that plagued my restless mind. But all I did was stand there, dumbfounded, and watched as the officer got back into his patrol car and disappeared down the street. I sat back down and attempted to piece together the event that had just unfolded before my eyes. In my 30 years of existence, I'd never been this perplexed by something, and I found it invigorating. After some deliberation, I came to the conclusion that the officer's words were not his own. Something had spoken through him. If I tracked him down and asked the officer to explain himself, he would likely not remember anything, and would probably write me a citation for driving with expired tags. This stranger with the luminous eyes may be connected to my nocturnal travels, perhaps in an adversarial way. This was nothing more than my mind drawing wild speculations. Suddenly, there came a familiar, yet out-of-place noise from inside my house. Everyone knows that sound a camera makes when the shutter snaps a picture. I could think of no earthly reason why that sound would be coming from my dwelling. I stood in the open doorway for several minutes before cautiously entering. The corridor led to the kitchen, which had a connecting bathroom on the far side. I estimated that this was the origin of the disturbance. As I approached, the sharp noise became louder. I carefully peeked around the archway to see that the bathroom door was open. A curvy figure dressed in a short skirt that left little to the imagination stood before the vanity. I exited the hallway and positioned myself perpendicular to the bathroom door, bewildered by the sight of a woman in my home. Though she had her back turned to me, I couldn't help but feel slightly aroused. Her tight black outfit revealed a fine pair of legs that led up to a heart-shaped backside. Her upper body was covered by a tight black sweatshirt that outlined a toned physique. The hair was dark and fell into place at all the right angles. This was the body of a woman who belonged on a billionaire's yacht off the coast of Dubai. Considering the rewards this world offers to such exceptional beauty further vexed me as to why this specimen was in my house, apparently taking pictures of herself. However, in my experience, having an attractive shell does not guarantee a sound mind. In fact, quite the contrary. But at the end of the day, the world's best-looking intruder is still an intruder and must be dealt with as such. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my house?" The figure's head perked up and slowly turns to face me. A pair of piercing, violet eyes caused me to stagger and fall. The woman's facial features were a visage of duality, smooth, toned skin that ended just under the eyes, with the entire lower half of her face being of a skeletal nature. Amused by my terror, the woman let out a morbid laugh, as she emerged from the bathroom doorway. A voice crackled from inside the rows of unmoving silver teeth.
Hello there. I'm the Defiler. Don't you think I'm pretty?
Her violet eyes flickered, followed by the rapid-fire sounds of a snapping shutter.
Such beautiful fear.
I was bound by unrelenting terror, paralyzed to my kitchen floor. I looked on and whimpered like a wounded dog waiting to be put out of its misery. The Defiler's optical hue gleamed as she tilted her head to one side.
It's time for you to sleep now.
She revealed a black cavity embedded into the palm of her left hand, and a spiral of violet energy came forth and formed the helix of light that overcame me. My fear was overtaken by involuntary lethargy, as the sights of the tinted light soon faded, as I plummeted into the depths once again. I felt the gravity of my insignificance as I walked upon a black surface, looking out into an abyss that could not be seen, as a thundering of celestial emanations echoed above. A path was soon illuminated by a forming gloom on the horizon. As I approached, I saw pulsating forms writhing in the darkness, as a cacophony of sickening lamentations and moans of pleasure oozed from them. These repulsive masses extended into the gloom, and I could decipher moving limbs and bobbing heads as they groped, licked, and gnawed at each other. I noticed a hooded figure standing among the debauchery. It then began to make its way towards me. I once again felt the fear begin to stir within me. However, a snap cut through the soundscape, and I felt my trepidation instantly melt away as the silhouette emerged from the obscurity. Beneath the black cloak was a pale face that donned a black blindfold with several needles skewering the areas where the eyes would have been. A violet glow radiated from the tips of the protrusions. We awkwardly faced each other as the moving masses continued their perverted recreations. A raspy voice came from its black lips, breaking the stagnation.
I have temporarily suppressed your fear to converse with you.
Who are you? And what is this place?
I do not have a name. I have a title, granted to me by the one I serve. I am the Foreseer. We reside in the domain of Ophiomorphis.
What the cloaked man said didn't mean anything to me, but somehow made perfect sense. What the hell am I doing here? The Foreseer offered no explanation. Instead, he folded his gaunt hands together under his cloak and walked past me.
Come and walk with me, Charles.
The cloaked man and I walked along the moaning masses in awkward silence. I gathered that the question that I asked before did not have a simple answer. After taking in my macabre surroundings, I decided to ask a more obvious question. What are they?
The remnants of wasted potential. They wait to be devoured by the one I serve. Until then, they wallow in their own primitive urges.
Is this what will become of me?
That depends on if you allow the limitations of your mortal perception to consume you.
What the hell does that even mean? And you never answered my earlier question. Why am I here? The Foreseer shifted his head to look out into the terrain of wasted potential. I had silently deduced that even though the creature's eyes were surely destroyed, he did not need them to see.
There is only so much I can reveal to you. We did not seek you out. You came to us. You will inevitably come to a crossroads where you must make a choice.
Could you be any more vague? Should I even ask why you have 9-inch nails sticking out of your eyes? The Foreseer let out an amused chuckle without breaking stride and approached a console located at the very end of the path just before it dipped off into a massive gorge. His next words were deliberate and cunning as a gaunt hand appeared from the cloak and rested on one of the console's metallic levers.
The real question is, do you want to understand?
The ground beneath us began to rumble as a tumult of agonized wailing erupted from the surrounding heaps. I lost my footing and fell onto the rough gravel. The blackness before us took on a liquid property and gathered at the center of the canyon before it took on a familiar shape. I stood to my feet as a towering form reflected in my eyes. It was the same construct I saw in the gloom. The monolith. During my awestruck stupor, a rectangular platform appeared beneath the Foreseer and carried him out into the gorge, where it hovered at the right side of the monolith. The console simultaneously disappeared into the gravel, leaving me with a perfect view. A second platform appeared perpendicular to the Foreseer before it was engulfed by a helix of violet light, and a shape appeared upon the platform. The mass congealed and twisted into a pair of humanoid figures engaged in intercourse. Following the moans of climax, the figures liquefied and united, and the amalgamation contorted into a shapely female body as a black substance crawled up her flawless skin, covering her breasts and vulva. The woman placed her hands over her face as she screamed in agony. Red rivers fell between her fingers, and her wails of pain transformed into sadistic, uncontrolled laughter. Soon, the woman removed her hands, and the horrifying face of the Defiler was revealed. The Foreseer and the Defiler turned to face the monolith as the violet energy reappeared on its exterior. The light formed a vertical line and then elevated itself from the surface. A low hum emanated from the luminescence as it began to separate, creating a 3-dimensional opening. A visage of a face wearing a metallic respirator appeared in a rippling projection, and a violet light flickered from within soulless black eyes. A distorted voice resonated from the aperture.
Welcome to your destiny, Charles.
The Foreseer raised one of his gaunt hands, and with a snap of his finger, primal fear came rushing back through my veins. I made to escape, but the path behind me had vanished beneath a mass of writhing limbs and groaning faces. I fell to my knees, clutching my beating heart, and began to hyperventilate. I had to regain control of myself. Through panicked breaths, I reasoned that the 3 creatures had brought me to this place for some reason. If they wanted me dead, they would have already ended my life. If I was to prevent my assimilation into the piles of despair that littered this place, I would have to listen to what they had to say. Truthfully, I've had my fill of cryptic imagery and vague explanations. Whatever this was had to be more important than my fear. I stood to my feet and turned to face the trio behind me. The distorted voice came again.
Are you ready?
Despite the nightmarish appearance of the figure, the words sounded as if they were spoken by a man of reason. I responded with a simple, "Yes."
Very well,
said the distorted voice as the rippling visage poured onto a third platform that was centered between the others. The cascading matter formed a hovering shape. Its armor emitted a dull shine as the gears embedded in its design rotated like clockwork. A network of tubes pumped black fluid into exposed veins, and a cylindrical headgear towered above all. I felt as if I was in the presence of a deity. and I should be bowing my head. You are the emissary.
That is accurate.
The creature confirmed, raising his two riddled arms to either side.
We are the three disciples to the great god of the voids. He who feeds on mortal dreams, the serpent of the celestial realms.
Why is your god so fucking interested in me? It looks like he has plenty of food from what I can see.
Your incomprehension is a symptom of your mortal perception.
But I am mortal. How else would I perceive things?
You cannot hide the truth from us, Charles. We know that you've yearned for enlightenment your entire life. An unseen power locked inside you has brought you here. This is not beyond your ability to understand. There is but one reason for your hesitation.
I stared into the darkness below as I thought about her beautiful green eyes. The emissary continued.
It is not these constructs of flesh and machine we utilize to contain our true nature, nor the mounds of despair that frighten you. It is the prospect of losing her.
I closed my eyes and whispered her name. Julia.
She is the last thing that binds you to the human experience.
I fell to my knees as tears welled up in my eyes. I hated being so defeated by the words of a stranger, but he had done it. He managed to tear down my protective walls and exposed my fractured heart with only a few sentences. I was suddenly forced to face the truth that had haunted me ever since the day Julia walked out of my life. I felt the warmth of heartbroken tears rolling down my face as I allowed the truth to be set free.
Julia, why did you leave me? I fucking loved you. I've been so lost without you. Why?
Have no illusions, Charles. That path has ended.
The emissary's emotionless statement froze my beating heart. In that very moment, I decided that if the world I knew didn't care about my suffering, why should I continue to be a part of it? What good is building a new bridge if it just gets torn down all over again? Perhaps these strange entities have something better to offer. A smile formed on my face, and I stood to my feet, allowing the inner darkness to flourish. What do you want me to do? A violet hue radiated from the needle tips of the foreseer as a raspy voice fell from his grinning black lips.
I believe he now sees the light.
If you happens to be at the corner of Heartbreak Avenue and Dead End Way at approximately 10:30 p.m., you would have seen a spiraling violet light appear in the middle of the street, with two figures materializing within the ray. The kind of thing that ends up on those shitty TV shows showcasing various UFO sightings and paranormal happenings before trying to sell you a magical vitamin that gives you more energy but only manages to leave a bad taste in your mouth. The Defiler and I stood side by side under the single functioning streetlight on Dead End Way as we looked at the single completed house at the far end of the thoroughfare. You couldn't have brought us any closer? I asked, hoping that the Defiler would realize that we were still roughly half a mile from our destination and would correct her error. She only offered a playful shrug and a distorted giggle as she began to skip down the road towards the 2-story house at the end of the block. I saw no point in arguing with my lovely, yet grotesque companion, as I shoved my hands into my pockets and began the long stride. A mixture of both recent and past memories flooded the forefront of my consciousness. I could not remember the pleasure of Julia's body without the crushing pain she left me with. This duality gave way to frustrations of hypothetical judgments manufactured by my experiences with collective society. It vexed me to no end that there are those who reside somewhere out there in the ether who would just expect me to respect a self-serving decision that directly impacts my mental stability and simply move on with my life. That outlook denies my true nature to flourish in its purest form. Perhaps there are those who can easily adapt to unfortunate circumstances, but I'm definitely not one of them. I was wronged, passed up for someone who was subjectively better than me. Yes, maybe I don't fit in or look good in one of your little internet posts, but at least I have a fucking personality, you bitch. The violet eyes of the defiler looked back at me, and I realized that my thoughts had become verbal, which often happens when I'm frustrated. So much complexity encased in my skull, my thoughts would build up into a raging storm and evacuate the mental labyrinth and expel themselves into the atmosphere like toxic waste. The street was lined with skeletal structures of concrete and wood, which would be soon constructed into homes for the simple-minded drones who would occupy them, where they would live out their mundane lives. The defiler was now posing atop a telephone box as if she were modeling for some pretentious fashion publication. She held a tiny flower in her right hand and raised it up to her nasal cavity before she widened the row of her silver teeth and devoured it. Despite the appearance of her face and her childish behavior, there are those out there who would obsess over this creature, another aspect of my species I absolutely reviled. I could never allow an interesting thing just to be an interesting thing. Fandom had to form around it, completely ruining its appeal. However, I knew where this obsession stemmed from. It was a calling of an unkindled primal urge, a tragedy that befell most human beings. But even I must admit, the defiler's tight outfit and shapely body did pull my strings. I could easily picture her on that telephone box, pleasuring herself with one hand as she beckoned me with the other. Her violet-tinted eyes followed me as I walked past. I then heard the soft thud of her leather boots hitting the sidewalk as I deciphered the shape that sat in the driveway of the house at the dead end of Dead End Way. The dynasty symbolized the presence of my arch-nemesis. These were his grounds. The walking female construct behind me was merely the key to the castle. My determination would be my sword. It wasn't long before we stood before the two-story house. I must admit that I was familiar with this dwelling. I've spent many nights in my car watching this place filled with thoughts of malicious intent, unknowingly foreshadowing this night. How so very amusing. It appeared that Mr. Perfect fancied himself some kind of suburban lumberjack. A tree stump stood aside a stack of planks with an axe embedded into its surface, its handle facing me as if welcoming its use. My hand wrapped around the smooth wooden shaft and dislodged the hatchet from the stump before meeting my companion at the back door. A small sticker read, "This property is under the protection of Sentry Guard Security Services." I turned to my companion. "Do you mind?" The defiler let out a distorted giggle as she raised her left hand and summoned forth a helix before skipping into the light and disappearing. Moments later, I was greeted by her violet eyes, playfully poking out from the open doorway. Gripping the axe, I entered the house, passing my companion, who now sat at the dining room table, biting into the security panel she had ripped from the wall. Adorable. It made her way to the adjacent staircase and ascended them, one creaky step at a time. I made no effort to conceal my presence as I entered the hallway upstairs, slamming the axe into the wall, awakening my nemesis from his slumber. Mr. Perfect appeared at the far end of the hallway with wide eyes on his face and a loaded revolver in his hand.
Charles? What the fuck are you doing here?
Once he saw the axe in my hands, he realized the purpose of my visit, and he cocked the hammer of his gun and aimed it.
Shit. Drop the axe or I'll shoot!
I felt a sickly grin form on my face. A maniacal laugh escaped my mouth as I raised the axe above my head and charged toward him with blind madness. 6 shots exited the gun's barrel and were instantly evaporated by violet energy, and the hatchet buried itself into the stunned look on Mr. Perfect's face. Approximately 3 hours later, Julia had returned from the graveyard shift at the hospital. When she entered the house and saw the crater in the wall where the security panel used to be, her routine was replaced by panic.
Oh my god! David!
She rushed up the stairs, not even noticing the open back door or the vengeful ghost sitting at the dining room table. Her terrified screams echoed through the house once she saw the hatchet sticking out of Mr. Perfect's skull. Pathetic sobs escaped her mouth as she shambled towards her lover's corpse. Her advance was halted with a sound of shutter snaps from the darkness behind the fallen body. Julia shrieked as the defiler emerged.
Oh, such beautiful fear.
A playful voice crackled as a pair of violet eyes entered the hallway, causing Julia to back away. She then bumped into someone standing at the top of the stairs. She spun around, and her eyes met the gaze of a man deprived of sanity. Her scream was silenced as my hand covered her mouth. Hello, my love. Hellish insanity had completely consumed me. It was as if my own words were foreign to me. I forced Julia to look at my approaching companion. I've been chosen, Julia. They can see what you never saw. My potential. My greatness. Julia struggled as the defiler drew closer. It'll all be over soon, baby. I promise. The light appeared from the defiler's left hand and engulfed us. I released my grip on Julia. There was nowhere she could run. Her mortal perception consumed her as she looked from side to side, taking in the heaps of wailing ambrosia. Contorted faces moaned, and emaciated limbs reached out in endless melancholy. Julia's terror was cut short by the shaking ground. A tremendous rumble resounded from the dark chasm before us as the monolith erected itself. 3 solid platforms materialized above the darkness, and a violet tri-beam projected from the monolith's surface, summoning the Foreseer, the Defiler, and the Emissary.
Where are we, Charles? Who the fuck are they?
Julia shouted before the back of my hand met her right cheek, sending her to the ground. It wasn't in my nature to strike women, but my eagerness for the end game dissolved such principles. Julia clutched the side of her face as she looked up at me with a deeply wounded expression. Shut up, Julia. I can't hear what they have to say over your whining. I saw anger well up in her eyes, but before she could spit venom at me, the distorted voice of the Emissary cut in.
We stand upon the precipice of a great becoming. The 4th disciple of the Great Serpent has accepted his destiny. May his potential flourish beyond the constraints of his mortal perception.
The emissary's black eyes turned violet, and a familiar glow surrounded Julia as she stood to her feet.
Embrace her, Charles. Enlighten her before you begin this journey.
I wrapped my arms around the woman I once loved and spoke softly into her ear. Julia, you were the one person I ever truly loved, and you left me a broken man. But you unknowingly opened a door, and the void you left inside me brought me to this place. From the dark depths below, a towering dune of wailing faces rose up. I looked into Julia's green eyes, I destroying the light. You allowed darkness to take my soul. I kissed her soft lips and released her as the black tendrils of Ophiomorphus enveloped her. She screamed in terror and struggled in vain as her body was raised above the towering form.
Charles, I'm sorry. Please don't let them take me.
Julia plummeted, and red streams sprayed over my face as her body was torn apart and devoured. My humanity died, and madness took hold, rushing through me like a crimson tide. The tower of faces disappeared into the shadow as my blood-drenched body was hoisted into the chamber. Uncontrollable barks of laughter consumed me as the blades left the cylinders and descended upon my flesh, shedding my mortal perception.
There's always a reason